How are you trying to get round that without the support of the Legislative Council for the bill?
Okay, so since 1961 in the Isle of Man, we've had legislation that means that if a bill goes into the House of from the House of Keys to the Legislative Council, passed by the House of Keys, but Legislative Council doesn't pass it, the House of Keys have got the right to pass it themselves. So if 17 people in the House of Keys vote for it on Tuesday, December the 19th, that bill will then go to the next available sitting of Tynwald and would then become law if the Queen or the Lieutenant Governor was to give it royal assent there afterwards. So we always say that the only power of the Legislative Council is to delay legislation. This is an example of a bill that's gone through the House of Keys. It's clearly the will of the House of Keys that this becomes law. The Legislative Council didn't deal with it, didn't pass it within 12 months, so therefore the House of Keys has the right for 6 months to make it law without going back to the Legislative Council.
Does this motion give the current House of Keys enough of a chance to actually debate the proposals within the bill? Because it was passed by the previous House of Keys, but of course we know half of those members are no longer in the House of Keys. Are you making a huge assumption here that all of the new members will be of the same mind as the previous members?
I'm not making any assumption. That's why we're debating it next Tuesday. So it's not just a vote, it's a full debate, and I really do hope it's a proper debate. There are very important principles here. Two of them I'll identify. The first one is, should it be the House of Keys electing the Chief Minister? I'm clearly of the view that's yes. 24 of the MHKs in the last House of Keys before the election were of the view that was yes. 22 people voted effectively for Lord Lisvane's recommendation that should be yes. So that's one principle. All members of the House of Keys have got the chance to vote on that first principle. The second principle is that the House of Keys ultimately has the power to make legislation. The Legislative Council is just there to revise legislation and to delay legislation for 12 months now. It used to be for slightly longer, between 1961 and 2006, but now it's just for 12 months. Because we have summer holidays where we don't work in the Isle of Man Parliament, it effectively comes a bit longer than that. There were 6 sittings of Keys at which I could bring this motion. The first one was at the end of October. This is the last one. I put it back because the people who are most closely involved are also very closely involved in government, and I wanted to put this bill in its right place in terms of priorities. It's absolutely pressing to sort out public sector pensions. We're doing that. Preparing the budget, we're doing that. Making the island local economy stack up, we're doing that. But also important is making sure that our democracy works. People didn't vote as much in the 2016 election as they had done in 2011 and as they had done in the election before that, and the election before that turnout's been going down. I believe if you were to go and talk to the average person in the Isle of Man, they wouldn't say Tynwald's working perfectly at the moment. And I think this is a very important motion. It's a very important debate. It's a very important decision. But I really do hope that more than 17 of my House of Keys colleagues will vote to make the Council of Ministers Amendment Bill law in the Isle of Man.
Now, there is a committee looking at the Lisvane recommendations at the moment, the functioning of Tynwald Committee, chaired by Mr Speaker. Would it not be better placed dealt with under that context, by that committee, rather than bringing it forward now as a separate issue? 2
points to make initially. The first one is that Lord Lisvane described a committee as a place that good ideas could be lured into and then slowly strangled. So that's the first point. And the second point is that there was no need for the committee to consider this issue because the will of the House of Keys was already established. Legislation had been passed, ultimately without division at third reading, unanimously in the final vote at the clauses stage. So there's a clear will of the House of Keys. We never got to the Alfred Cannon amendments to the Lisvane. We never got to vote on them. They came after we'd already agreed that the committee could look at certain issues. This issue wasn't one of the issues that was approved for the committee to look at in June 2017. It was added in July as part of the context of looking at the overall future of the Legislative Council. I've got full respect for a committee. I've got full respect for Mr Speaker, who's chairing that committee. The 4 additional politicians who are on it, are excellent people. no reason why they shouldn't look at the whether or not this legislation is perfect rather than just adequate, and if we need any amendments or to standing orders, which I think is most likely, could well propose them. But that's not the point. The most important point is this debate on the 19th is about the principle: is House of Keys paramount relative to the Legislative Council? Firstly. Secondly, should only House of Keys members be choosing the Chief Minister after a general election, or should indirectly elected aldermanic bench type people be involved?
Now it'll be a minimum of 13 MHKs have to support. If this goes through, it would be 13 MHKs could elect a chief minister.
No fewer than 13.
No fewer than 13. Now, when it comes to Tynwald sittings, where the Legislative Council do have votes on things, could that make it very difficult if the whole of the Legislative Council is opposed to the candidate that the Keys have elected for Chief Minister? Wouldn't it make the Council of Ministers' jobs awfully difficult getting anything through Tynwald?
Well, this is the Conservative argument that will be made, and I think in the last House the Chief Minister said he liked being Chief Minister of the whole of Tynwald. So we're now going into the wider issues about the role of the Legislative Council and the role of the MLCs, but that's not the point. The most important point is, should immediately following a general election unelected people be involved in electing the Chief Minister, and that trumps everything else? I don't think it will be difficult. This last election in 2016 was actually the procedure used was the one that my motion in Tynwald adopted, whereby the House of Keys voted first and then the Legislative Council voted according to the will of the House of Keys. The vote was open for the first time. I think that showed that this system works. The Legislative Council isn't, in nobody's view, really involved in government. That's for the elected politicians. The role of the Legislative Council is to do things like scrutiny, policy development, be involved in statutory bodies, in my view. But that's not relevant at this debate. This debate is solely about the principle of general election, mandate, electing the Chief Minister and ministers and getting the programme for government. And that process has got to be the result of a general election, and directly elected members have got to be the representatives of the people involved in that.
Now, it was Mr Cannon whose bill it was in the first place back in 2016. He hasn't decided to bring this forward himself.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have his support for this motion?
I believe so, yes. And it's entirely, he's got to speak for himself, but I imagine his reasons are similar to mine, which is the right place for consideration of this issue is when government business is put to bed as best as we can, because both of us have been incredibly busy on the programme for government, all sorts of things in the last 2 months. December the 19th is a session. We're going to consider the credit union bill at clauses stage, but basically we can debate for as long as we want up until 5:30 this very important constitutional issue. So I have no reason to believe that Alf Cannon's not fully behind me. I don't believe he's going to be seconding the bill. Bill Malarkey is a long-term campaigner for this change, and I think he's stated that he's going to second it, and full respect for him. It's good to actually take a position on this, and for Mr Malarkey, it's of paramount importance that MHKs are there to represent the public's view on who should be the next Chief Minister. So I'm expecting Bill Malarkey to second my motion. Could
you end up with a situation where bills, why bother sending them to the Legislative Council if you can overrule them?
Well, that's been part of Westminster-type democracy for 110 years. It is an important point that the will of the people, as through their elected representatives, is more important than the second chamber's will. So I'm not going to get involved in changing the situation. It's very valuable to have a second chamber, or at least a committee considering legislation. It's very valuable to have people like those in the second chamber, like our Legislative Council, being involved in the political process. But ultimately, the elected representatives, the will of the elected representatives has to prevail over the will of unelected representatives.
The bill also covers a vote of no confidence in the Council of Ministers. Is that something you support as well, the change there? It would be 16 votes.
We have to, you have to have an arrangement for a vote of no confidence. If you have a vote for electing somebody, that's the same as in the current legislation. Mr Watterson moved unsuccessfully an amendment in the clauses stage in the Keys in the last House to reduce that down to 13 from 16. To me, that would be wrong. To me, a higher number is better for a vote of no confidence than the vote
Although when you work out that vote, you would need at least one member of the Council of Ministers to vote in support of a vote of no confidence in themselves.
Well, that's how we are currently constructed, but we're in the process of revisiting how we organise government, and in the law, there's not a minimum number of ministers. There's just a maximum number of ministers. We have to take all these things into account, and that's the sort of thing that Mr. Watterson, the Speaker of the House of Keys Committee, excellent 5 people, can look at in the more general term. That's a wider issue than the very specifics of this.